The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Maris Vell pushed her cleaning cart down the long corridor of Orbital 9's maintenance level. The steady hum of the station's life support systems provided a comforting white noise that had become the soundtrack to her otherwise unremarkable existence. At 42, she had spent the better part of 2 decades cleaning the enormous space station, moving invisibly among both military personnel and civilians who barely registered her presence. Another day, another sector, she muttered to herself, checking her tablet for the day's assignments. Level B7 needed attention, the old storage compartments that nobody visited except when something broke down or needed to be hidden away. Perfect for her mood today, solitary and mindless. As the elevator descended, Maris caught her reflection in the polished metal doors. Gray had begun to thread through her once auburn hair, which she kept tied back in a practical knot. Lines had formed at the corners of her eyes, not from laughter, but from 20 years of witnessing a war that seemed determined to outlive her. The navy blue janitor's uniform hung loosely on her frame. She had lost weight again, a side effect of the latest rationing measures. The 100-year war between the Human Alliance and the Zorath Federation had become such a constant that children born on Orbital 9 had never known peace. Maris herself had been just 16 when the bombing of New Sydney had claimed her parents and younger brother. She closed her eyes against the memory, feeling the elevator slow as it reached B7. The doors parted with a pneumatic hiss, revealing the dimly lit storage level. Rows of unmarked containers created a maze of shadows. The ceiling lower here than in the residential and military sections above. The air carried a metallic scent, mixed with the musty smell of forgotten things. Computer. Maintenance lights to 60%, Maris commanded, and additional fixtures sputtered to life, casting a harsh glow across the dusty floor. She pushed her cart forward, the squeaking wheel echoing in the emptiness. She worked methodically, moving from section to section, the routine providing a mindless comfort. This level hadn't been properly cleaned in months. Budget cuts meant fewer janitors and more territory for each. Most of her colleagues complained, but Maris preferred the solitude, especially in these forgotten corners of the station where she could let her guard down. Near the rear bulkhead, she noticed something unusual, a trail of dark droplets leading to a service junction. Frowning, Maris followed the stains, initially assuming a coolant leak. But as she drew closer, the distinctive coppery smell told her otherwise. Blood. And not the familiar crimson of human blood, but a deep indigo that could only belong to one species. Zorath. Her heart quickened. Official reports claimed no Zorath forces had penetrated Orbital 9's defenses in over 3 years. Yet, here was evidence to the contrary, leading directly to the maintenance access room ahead. Every instinct told her to report this immediately, to sound the alarm. A Zorath infiltrator could sabotage life support, plant explosives, or worse. 26 years of propaganda had conditioned all humans to fear and hate the reptilian species that had allegedly started the century-long conflict. But something else moved within her, the same instinct that had led her to volunteer in the medical bay during her off hours. Someone was injured, possibly dying. Before she could reconsider, Maris pushed open the heavy metal door. The access room was little more than a junction box for maintenance systems, barely 3 meters square. Huddled in the corner, partially hidden behind a panel, was the unmistakable form of a Zorath, nearly 7 feet tall even in a crouch position, with scaled skin the color of burnished copper and a cranial ridge that distinguished the northern clans. The alien's breathing came in labored gasps. One hand clutched to a wound in its side where dark blood seeped between long, elegant fingers. Maris froze in the doorway, her mind racing. The Zorath hadn't noticed her yet, its 4 eyes, all a brilliant amber, fixed on the wound it was attempting to staunch. Military-grade armor lay discarded nearby, the insignia suggesting a rank far higher than any foot soldier. She could close the door quietly, return to the elevator, Report the intruder. It would be the proper action of a loyal Alliance citizen. The Zorath would be captured or killed, and she would perhaps receive a commendation. Instead, Maris found herself stepping forward. The movement caught the alien's attention. Its head snapped up, eyes widening, body tensing despite its obvious pain. A translator device at its throat activated with a soft hum. Human, he growled, the translation rendering a deep, masculine voice. Come to finish your handiwork? Maris remained still, acutely aware of her vulnerability. Even wounded, the Zorath could easily overpower her. You're bleeding, she said simply. The alien's expression shifted, in a way she couldn't interpret, the scales around its eyes contracting. Your observational skills are remarkable, came the sardonic reply. Will your soldiers arrive momentarily? There are no soldiers, Maris heard herself say. Just me. She took another step closer, ignoring the voice of caution screaming in her mind. The cleaning cart remained in the corridor, but her kit included basic medical supplies, disinfectants, and bandages for minor workplace injuries. You need medical attention, she continued, keeping her voice even. The Zorath made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. And you offer this freely? To an enemy of your species? Maris knelt slowly, maintaining a cautious distance. I'm a janitor, not a soldier. And you're a person who's bleeding. Something in her simple statement seemed to confuse the alien. He studied her with all four eyes. The larger primary pair, and the smaller secondary set above them that Zorath used for peripheral vision. My ship was damaged, he finally said, his voice weaker than before. I needed components. Did not expect the security response. He shifted, revealing the full extent of his injury, a deep plasma burn that had seared through his side. Don't move, Maris instructed, retreating to her cart. She returned with her first aid kit and a container of clean water. The Zorath watched her warily as she approached again, but made no move to stop her. This will sting, she warned, soaking a sterile cloth with antiseptic. When she touched it to the wound, the alien hissed but remained still. Working carefully, Maris cleaned the area around the injury. Zorath physiology wasn't entirely alien to her. Part of her volunteer medical training had included xenobiology basics, though she'd never expected to use it on an actual Zorath. You have done this before, the alien observed. I volunteer in the medical bay, she replied, applying a coagulant gel that was safe for most known species. Hold this in place. The Zorath complied, his large hand briefly covering hers. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her. Not unpleasant, but startling. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Maris felt something she couldn't explain. A profound sadness emanating from this being, a weariness that matched her own. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand on his arm. The scales were warm and smooth beneath her palm. What is your name? She asked softly. The alien hesitated before answering. Calreth, he said finally. Brigadier General Calreth of the Zorath 7th Fleet. Maris's hand jerked back involuntarily. Not just any Zorath, but a high-ranking officer. The rational part of her brain screamed that she should run, report him immediately. Instead, she found herself saying, I'm Maris Vel. Why are you helping me, Maris Vel? Calreth asked, genuine confusion in his voice. She had no ready answer that made sense, even to herself. Because it's what people should do for each other, she finally replied, continuing to dress his wound. Even if they're supposed to be enemies. As she worked, an unfamiliar sensation bloomed in her chest, a connection that transcended language, species, and a century of hatred. She looked up to find all four of Calreth's eyes studying her intently, as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. You are either very brave or very foolish, he said at last. Perhaps both. Maris secured the final bandage. Probably both, she agreed with a small smile. Can you stand? You can't stay here. This area will be inspected eventually. Calreth attempted to rise, grimacing with the effort. Instinctively, Maris moved to support him, wrapping an arm around his waist. The alien stiffened at the contact, but allowed her assistance, leaning heavily against her as they stood together in the small room. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. As Maris held Calreth upright, the physical contact between them deepened the strange connection she had sensed earlier. A wave of emotions washed over her, not her own, but his. Pain, fear, exhaustion, and beneath it all, a longing for something lost long ago. Calreth froze, his breath catching. You felt that, he stated. Not a question but a realization tinged with disbelief. What was that? Maris whispered, her mind reeling. Impossible, Calreth murmured. No human has ever... He trailed off, staring at her with new intensity. The Xehanthor. The soul touch. It is a Zorath ability, but only between our own kind. Before Maris could respond, a distant alarm began to sound. Calreth tensed, his hand moving instinctively to where a weapon would have been. They've discovered my ship, he said grimly. Maris made a split-second decision that would forever alter the course of her life, and unknowingly, the fate of two civilizations. There's an old emergency shelter through the maintenance tunnel, she said quickly, supporting more of his weight. It was built during the station's construction, before the newer security systems. It won't appear on current scans. Calreth studied her face. Why would you harbor an enemy officer? Maris met his gaze steadily. Because right now, you're just a person who needs help. And maybe I'm tired of this war. For a long moment, Calreth was silent. Then, with a slight nod, he allowed her to guide him toward the hidden tunnel entrance. As they disappeared into the darkness, neither could have imagined how their chance encounter would ripple outward, challenging a century of hatred and eventually reaching the highest echelons of power in both civilizations. Maris Vell was just a janitor, invisible to most who passed her in the corridors of Orbital 9. But in that moment, her simple act of compassion set in motion events that would eventually bring two warring species face to face. Not on the battlefield, but in the tentative, fragile space where peace becomes possible. The emergency shelter was a relic from Orbital 9's construction phase, a reinforced compartment designed to house workers during solar radiation events. Long since forgotten in official station records, it had become one of many ghost rooms that existed in the gaps between newer installations. Maris helped Calreth lower himself onto a dusty bench. The aliens' breathing labored from their hurried journey through the narrow maintenance tunnel. The space was small, perhaps 4 meters square, with basic life support systems that still functioned on their independent power supply. A few storage lockers lined one wall, their contents unknown. Security sweeps won't detect you here, Maris assured him, activating the shelter's dim emergency lighting. The walls contain radiation shielding that blocks most scans. Calreth leaned back against the cold metal wall, his amber eyes evaluating their surroundings. Your knowledge of this station's hidden spaces is unexpected for a janitor. Janitors go everywhere, Maris replied with a slight shrug. We see everything, but nobody sees us. She busied herself checking the ancient environmental controls, avoiding his penetrating gaze. The reality of what she was doing, harboring an enemy combatant, a high-ranking Zorath officer, was beginning to sink in. You're committing treason, Calreth stated matter-of-factly, echoing her thoughts. By your alliance laws, sheltering me is punishable by exile or execution. Maris's hands stilled on the control panel. I know, she said quietly. Yet you do it anyway. There was genuine curiosity in his tone. Why? She turned to face him, struggling to articulate feelings she barely understood herself. Because something happened when I touched you. Something important. She paused, searching for words. And because I've spent 20 years watching people die in a war nobody remembers how to end. Calreth was silent for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. Finally, he spoke. The Xanthor is sacred among my people. It is how we truly know one another, beyond words or deception, that a human could experience it. He shook his head slightly. It should not be possible. But it happened, Maris said. I felt your pain, not just physical, something deeper. The Zorath general's expression hardened. The connection goes both ways, Maris Vel. I felt your sorrow as well, the loss that haunts you. Maris looked away, unprepared for the sudden vulnerability. Nobody had spoken of her family in years. She had become adept at avoiding personal conversations, at keeping to herself. New Sydney, Calreth continued, his voice softer now. That is where your wound began. The mention of her childhood home sent a shock through Maris. How could you possibly know that? The Xanthor reveals truth. Not specific memories, but emotional truths. He shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his bandaged wound. I saw a great fire, felt the absence of those you loved. The bombing, Maris whispered, unwanted memories surfacing. I was 16. My parents and brother were at the Central Market when the Zorath warships appeared. Her voice took on a bitter edge. At least, that's what our government told us, that it was your people who struck first. Calreth's expression changed subtly, the scales around his eyes tightening. And we were told it was a human first strike against our civilian outposts that began the war. He gazed at her steadily. 100 years of retaliation for an attack that perhaps neither side actually launched. The implication hung in the air between them, too enormous to fully comprehend. Maris sank onto the bench opposite him, her mind racing. Could it be possible? A century of bloodshed based on a lie? Or, at minimum, a catastrophic misunderstanding? The shelter's communication panel suddenly crackled to life, startling them both. Attention all personnel. Security alert remains in effect. Possible Zorath infiltration in sectors 12 through 17. Report any suspicious activity immediately. Repeat. Security alert remains in effect. Maris glanced at the chronometer on her wrist. My shift ends in 20 minutes. If I don't check out, they'll notice. Go, Calreth said. Return to your life. Forget this encounter. She looked at him skeptically. And leave you here, injured, with the entire station searching for you? I have survived worse, he replied, though the pallor of his copper scales suggested otherwise. Maris stood, decision made. I'll come back with medical supplies and food. The environmental systems here will keep you stable. But you need proper treatment. She moved toward the exit, then paused. Promise me you won't try to leave or communicate with anyone. Calreth regarded her with a mixture of confusion and respect. You trust the word of a Zorath? I trust what I felt, she replied simply. When we touched. After a moment's hesitation, he inclined his head in what she recognized as a gesture of agreement. You have my word. Maris Vel. The journey back through the maintenance tunnels and to her regular cleaning route was tense, every shadow potentially hiding security personnel. Maris forced herself to complete her tasks with mechanical efficiency, fighting to keep her expression neutral whenever someone passed. She checked out at the end of her shift, heart pounding as her ID chip was scanned. But the security officer barely glanced at her, just another invisible janitor, finishing another forgettable day. Instead of heading to her quarters, Maris made her way to the medical bay where she volunteered. Dr. Alara Kess, the night shift physician, greeted her with surprise. Maris, I thought you weren't scheduled until tomorrow. Just thought I'd stop by, Maris replied, hoping her nervousness didn't show. There was a minor accident in maintenance. I used some supplies from my kit. Wanted to restock. Dr. Kess waved her toward the supply cabinet. Help yourself. Not much to spare these days, but basics are still available. While Alara attended to a patient with respiratory issues, Maris carefully selected bandages, antibiotics, pain medication, and nutritional supplements that would work with Zorath physiology. She slipped them into her bag, guilt coiling in her stomach at the deception. "Everything all right, Maris?" Dr. Kess asked, returning just as Maris was closing her bag. "You seem distracted." "Just tired," she lied. "The new rationing has made sleep difficult." Alara's expression softened with sympathy. "I have some herbal tea that helps. Let me get you some." As the doctor turned away, Maris noticed a data tablet left open on the counter, a xenobiology reference displaying Zorath anatomical information. Heart racing, she quickly tapped the screen, forwarding the file to her personal device before deleting the transfer record. "Here you are," Alara said, returning with a small package. "Steep it for at least 10 minutes. "Thank you." Maris managed a smile, tucking the tea into her bag alongside the stolen medical supplies. "I should go. Early shift tomorrow." She left the medical bay, guilt competing with determination. One more stop, the food dispensary, where she used her ration card to obtain 2 days' worth of protein packs. Claiming a faulty refrigeration unit in her quarters necessitated the stockpiling. Returning to the hidden shelter proved more difficult. Security patrols had increased, forcing her to take a circuitous route through rarely used corridors. Nearly 2 hours after leaving Calreth, she finally slipped back into the maintenance tunnels, praying he had kept his word and remained in place. The shelter door slid open at her approach, revealing Calreth seated exactly where she had left him. Though his posture was more rigid, his expression alert and wary until he recognized her. "You returned," he said, a note of surprise in his translated voice. "I said I would." Maris set down her bag and began unpacking the supplies. "How's the pain?" "Manageable," he replied, which she suspected was an understatement, given the tension visible in his body. She administered a pain-relieving injection and changed his bandages, working in silence. The wound looked marginally better. Zorath healing abilities were superior to human ones, but still serious. "There's something I need to ask you," Maris said finally, as she secured the fresh dressing. "Before I risk any more than I already have." Calreth met her gaze. "Ask." "What were you really doing on Orbital 9? A brigadier general wouldn't be sent for simple reconnaissance or sabotage." His expression remained impassive for a long moment before he answered. "I was not sent. I came on my own initiative." This was not the response Maris had expected. "Why?" Calreth's 4 eyes seemed to look through her, rather than at her. "Because after 100 years, this war has become a self-perpetuating machine. Because our leaders speak of final victories, while our people die endless deaths." His voice took on a bitter edge. "I came seeking information, proof of something I have long suspected." "What proof?" "That the catalyzing incident, the attack that began this war, was not what either of our governments claimed." He gestured toward the station around them. "Orbital 9 houses the Alliance's deepest archives. I believed I might find evidence here, in your historical records." Maris absorbed this, remembering their earlier conversation about New Sydney. "You were trying to access the central database." He nodded once. "I was detected before I could complete my search." A heavy silence fell between them as Maris processed the implications. If Calreth was telling the truth, if the century-long conflict had been built on deliberate deception, then everything she believed about her world was founded on lies. "You were a diplomat once," she said suddenly, the knowledge emerging from nowhere, or perhaps from the lingering effects of their strange connection. Calreth's expression registered surprise. "Yes," he confirmed. "Before the war escalated." "How did you know?" "I'm not sure," Maris admitted. "I just Saw it somehow. When we touched. The Xanthor continues to work between us, he said thoughtfully. Remarkable. Maris sat beside him on the bench, close but not touching. Tell me about the person you were before the war. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. Then, with a subtle shift in posture, Calreth seemed to relent to some internal debate. I was third emissary to the human territories, he began, his voice taking on a different quality, less military, more contemplative. My specialty was cultural integration. I believed our species had much to offer each other. A bitter laugh escaped him. Young and idealistic, as your kind might say. What happened? Maris asked softly. The incident happened. Accusations flew. Diplomats were recalled. Those of us who advocated for continued dialogue were reassigned. His hand moved unconsciously to trace the military insignia on his damaged armor. I was given a choice between service or imprisonment as a human sympathizer. You chose service. I chose survival, he corrected, with the intention of finding a way to end what never should have begun. Maris found herself believing him, and not only because of their inexplicable connection. There was a weariness in him that matched her own, the exhaustion of living too long with conflict, of watching hope slowly suffocate under the weight of endless war. I've spent most of my life hating your people, she admitted, because of New Sydney, because of propaganda, because it was easier than questioning. As have I, Calreth acknowledged. Hatred is a simple emotion. Understanding requires effort. A warning tone sounded from Maris's chronometer. Curfew in 30 minutes, she explained, rising reluctantly. I have to go before they lock down the residential sections. When will you return? Calreth asked, then added quickly. If you choose to return at all. Maris gathered her things, pausing at the door. Tomorrow, after my shift. She hesitated, then added, Rest now. Your body needs to heal. As she navigated the darkened maintenance tunnels, Maris felt as though she were moving between worlds, the familiar, structured existence she had maintained for decades, and something new and dangerous that had opened before her. Harboring Calreth was treason, yes, but walking away from the truth he represented seemed an even greater betrayal of herself and of the memory of those lost to a war that perhaps no one had truly wanted. Back in her sparse quarters, Maris lay awake long into the night cycle, replaying the day's events, the strange connection when they touched, the possibility that the war's origin was a fabrication, the risk she was taking, and the greater risk of doing nothing. What have I started? She whispered to the darkness, already knowing there was no turning back. Morning came too quickly. Maris moved through her routine with mechanical precision, haunted by the dual awareness of Calreth waiting in the hidden shelter and the increased security presence throughout the station. Armed guards now stood at key junctions, checking identification with greater scrutiny than usual. In the staff cafeteria, screens displayed security bulletins warning of possible Zorath infiltration. Maris kept her head down, focusing on her breakfast of synthetic protein and reconstituted fruit, trying to ignore the conversations around her. I heard they found traces of Zorath blood in Section 16, said a technician at the next table. Security's sweeping every maintenance tunnel and access shaft. About time, his companion replied. Those lizards have been too quiet lately. Something big must be brewing. Maris forced herself to continue eating, though her appetite had vanished. She wondered how long she could realistically hide Calreth, and what would happen when he was well enough to leave. Would he simply disappear, taking with him the questions they had begun to explore? Or would he be captured, interrogated, executed as an enemy combatant? Vel, hey, Maris. She looked up, startled, to see technician Wren Davies approaching her table. Wren was perhaps the closest thing Maris had to a friend on the station. They occasionally shared meal breaks when their shifts aligned. You look like you've seen a ghost, Wren said, sliding onto the bench across from her. "Don't tell me you're buying into the panic." Maris managed a weak smile. "Just tired. Double shifts this week." Wren nodded sympathetically. "They've got half the maintenance crew pulling security duty now. Speaking of which," she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Watch yourself in the lower levels. Major Saul is on the warpath. She's convinced the Zorath infiltrator is still on board. Major Regina Saul." The name sent a chill through Maris. The security chief was notorious for her hardline stance against anything Zorath. Rumors suggested she had lost her entire family in one of the early colony massacres. "Thanks for the warning," Maris said, pushing away her half-eaten breakfast. "I'd better get going. B section won't clean itself." "Be careful down there," Wren called after her. "And check in when your shift ends, okay? They're tracking everyone's movements." The morning passed in a haze of anxiety. Maris cleaned corridors and compartments with robotic efficiency, jumping at every announcement over the station's comm system, tensing whenever security personnel appeared. By midday, she had worked her way to level B9, just 2 sections away from the hidden access tunnel that led to Calreth. As she was restocking her cleaning cart, the corridor lights suddenly dimmed, replaced by the pulsing red of a station-wide alert. The automated announcement system activated. "Attention all personnel. Security lockdown initiated in sections B7 through B12. All non-essential personnel evacuate immediately. Security teams report to designated checkpoints. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Maris's heart hammered against her ribs. B7, exactly where the maintenance tunnel entrance was located. Had they found signs of Calreth's passage? Or worse, the shelter itself? She forced herself to continue working, mind racing. If she abandoned her post too quickly, it might draw attention. But every minute spent away from Calreth increased the risk of his discovery. "Janitor, you there!" Maris turned to see a security officer approaching, weapon drawn but not aimed. His expression was tense, alert. "Yes, sir," she managed, hoping her voice sounded steadier than it felt. "This section is being locked down. Gather your equipment and proceed to the nearest elevator bank. Level A3 is the designated holding area until the sweep is complete." "Of course," she nodded, hands trembling slightly as she organized her supplies. "May I ask what's happening?" The officer's expression darkened. "Possible Zorath biosignature detected. Major Saul has ordered a comprehensive sweep." He gestured impatiently. "Move it, now. All civilian personnel are being accounted for." Maris had no choice but to comply, following the stream of maintenance workers and technical staff being herded toward the elevators. Her mind whirled with desperate calculations. Calreth was hidden in a shelter designed to block radiation. Would it mask his biosignature from the advanced scanners security would be using? And even if it did, how could she warn him about the sweep? The holding area on A3 was a large recreation space, now crowded with confused and anxious station personnel. Maris found a quiet corner, trying to appear calm while inwardly frantic. Hours passed with no new information, just occasional updates that the security sweep was continuing. Near the end of the second hour, a commotion at the main entrance drew everyone's attention. Major Regina Saul strode into the room, her tall figure imposing in the black uniform of station security. Behind her followed a team of officers, and one civilian Maris recognized with a jolt, Professor Ilan Ferros, the station's xenobiology expert. Major Saul activated the room's announcement system, her voice cutting through the murmured conversations. "Attention! We have detected evidence of Zorath infiltration in the maintenance levels. All personnel will be screened before returning to duty stations." A ripple of concern moved through the crowd. Screening usually meant genetic scanning for any trace contact with Zorath biological material. "Additionally," Saul continued, "anyone who has accessed levels B7 through B10 in the past 72 hours will undergo enhanced interrogation. This is a matter of station security, Maris felt the blood drain from her face. Her cleaning assignments had taken her through those exact sections, including B7 where she had found Calreth. Enhanced interrogation would almost certainly include truth serums or mind-scanning technology. There would be no hiding her actions. As the crowd was organized into screening lines, Maris desperately considered her options. Running would immediately mark her as suspicious. Confessing voluntarily might earn some leniency, but would mean betraying Calreth. Attempting to lie through the screening seemed impossible. She was still struggling with this impossible choice when she noticed Professor Ferros separate from the security team and move toward a quiet corner. The older man looked troubled, his usual enthusiastic demeanor replaced by a grim seriousness. On impulse, Maris approached him, keeping her voice low. "Professor Ferros, may I speak with you?" The xenobiologist looked up, surprise registering in his tired eyes. "I'm afraid this isn't the best time, Ms. Vell, Maris Vell. I volunteer in medical sometimes, with Dr. Kess." Recognition flickered across his features. "Ah, yes. Alara mentioned you. But as I said, this is hardly—" "It's about the Zorath detection," Maris interrupted, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "I have information." Ferros studied her face for a long moment before nodding toward a small office adjacent to the main room. 5 minutes, he said quietly. Inside the office, with the door sealed, Maris fought to control her racing heart. This could be her biggest mistake yet, or her only chance. "Professor, what I'm about to tell you could be considered treason," she began, forcing the words out before her courage failed. "But I believe it's important." Ferros's expression remained neutral. "Go on." "The Zorath infiltrator. He's a high-ranking officer named Calreth. I found him injured in a maintenance junction and I've been helping him." She expected shock, anger, immediate calls for security. Instead, Ferros simply closed his eyes briefly, as if receiving confirmation of something long suspected. "Brigadier General Calreth," he said softly. "Former third emissary to human territories." Now it was Maris's turn to be shocked. "You know him?" "Of him," Ferros corrected. "Before the war. I was part of the xenobiology exchange program. Calreth was one of the few Zorath who believed in genuine cooperation between our species. He regarded her with new intensity. Where is he now? Hidden, but the security sweep. We'll find him eventually." Ferros finished grimly. "Major Saul has brought in quantum resonance scanners from the military section. They'll detect any life form, no matter how well shielded." Maris felt panic rising. "I have to warn him. Help him escape." "Why?" Ferros asked, his tone not accusatory but genuinely curious. "Why risk everything for a Zorath officer?" "Because—" Maris struggled to articulate what she barely understood herself. "Because when we touched, something happened. He called it Xeanthor, a soul touch. I felt his emotions, his memories, and he felt mine." Ferros's expression transformed from skepticism to fascination. "That's impossible. The Xeanthor is a neurological ability unique to Zorath physiology. No human has ever experienced it." "Well, I did," Maris insisted. "And there's more. Calreth believes the incident that started the war, the attack on New Sydney, and the Zorath outpost, wasn't what either government claimed. He came here looking for proof in the historical archives." The professor moved to a chair, sinking into it heavily. "Many of us have suspected as much for decades. But suspicion isn't proof, and those who question too loudly tend to disappear." He looked up at her. "Do you understand what you've stumbled into, Maris Vell? This isn't just about one Zorath officer. This is about a century of manufactured hatred." "Then help me," she pleaded. "Help us find the truth." Ferros was quiet for a long moment, internal conflict visible on his weathered face. Finally, He reached a decision. I can buy you some time, perhaps redirect the scanning teams, but you'll need to move him. The old emergency shelters won't hide him from quantum resonance. Where? The entire station is on alert. There's a research lab in Science Section 4 that's shielded against all forms of scanning. We use it for experiments with unstable particles. Pharos retrieved a data pad, quickly typing a security override. This will give you access. It's not connected to the main station systems, so security won't be monitoring it. Hope flickered in Maris's chest. Thank you, Professor. Don't thank me yet, he replied grimly. If you're caught, I'll deny everything. And if Kalreth is lying to you, if this is some elaborate Zorath plot, we'll both face execution for treason. He's not lying, Maris said with a certainty that surprised even her. I would know. Because of the Cianthor? Pharos shook his head slightly. A connection even I didn't think possible. I'd very much like to study this phenomenon, assuming we all survive. He handed her the data pad. Now go. I'll create a distraction in approximately 30 minutes. That's your window to move him. Maris slipped the pad into her pocket. Why are you helping us? Pharos's expression softened with old sorrow. Because I've spent 50 years watching a pointless war consume two civilizations. Because I've lost too many friends, human and Zorath, to a conflict that serves only those in power. He moved toward the door. And because if Kalreth is right about the war's origins, the truth deserves to be known, whatever the cost. Leaving the office separately to avoid suspicion, Maris positioned herself near an emergency exit. True to his word. Exactly 30 minutes later, Professor Pharos created a diversion, a supposed malfunction in the scanning equipment that required immediate attention from all technical personnel. In the resulting confusion, Maris slipped away, heart pounding as she made her way back toward the maintenance levels, through seldom-used access corridors. Every shadow seemed to hide security personnel. Every distant sound, like approaching footsteps. When she finally reached the hidden shelter, she found Kalreth alert and tense, clearly aware of the increased activity throughout the station. They're sweeping the entire maintenance section, she explained breathlessly. Quantum resonance scanners. We need to move you immediately. To her surprise, Kalreth didn't question her, simply gathering what few supplies they had. His wound had improved significantly. Zorath healing abilities were remarkable, but he still moved with obvious discomfort. I've secured a safer location, Maris continued, leading him toward a different maintenance tunnel than the one they had used previously. A research lab with proper shielding. You've taken an enormous risk returning, Kalreth observed, as they moved cautiously through the narrow passage. Why? Maris paused, turning to face him in the dim emergency lighting. Because I believe you. About the war. About the lies. And because... She hesitated, struggling to articulate the complex emotions the Cianthor had awakened. Because whatever this connection is between us, it matters. It means something. Kalreth studied her for a long moment, all four eyes intent on her face. Then, in a gesture she somehow knew was deeply significant in Zorath culture, he extended his hand, palm upward. Among my people, to offer one's hand thus is to pledge truth and loyalty. Without hesitation, Maris placed her hand in his. The now familiar sensation washed over her, a melding of emotions and impressions, not specific thoughts, but deep truths. In that touch, she felt Kalreth's genuine commitment to ending the war, his growing trust in her, and something else, a fragile hope taking root where there had been only bitter determination. We should continue, he said softly, reluctantly breaking the contact. Your security forces are nothing if not thorough. The journey to Science Section 4 was perilous, requiring them to navigate around security checkpoints and active scanning teams. Twice they nearly encountered patrols, saved only by Kalreth's acute hearing and Maris's knowledge of service alcoves where they could hide. Finally, they reached the specialized research lab. Maris used Professor Ferros's security override to access the sealed door, quickly ushering Calreth inside before anyone could witness their presence. The lab was small, but well-equipped, with advanced research stations and monitoring equipment surrounding a central testing chamber. Most importantly, the entire room was encased in a specialized shielding that would block any scan, including quantum resonance. "This will be safer than the shelter," Maris explained, securing the door behind them. "And more comfortable." Calreth moved around the space, examining the equipment with evident interest. "Your Professor Ferros must be taking a significant risk to provide this sanctuary." "He believes in the same things you do," Maris replied, activating the lab's independent life support systems. "That the war is based on lies, that there might be another way forward." "There are those among my people who share this belief," Calreth said, settling carefully into a chair designed for human proportions. "Though they must be even more cautious than your professor, the Federation does not tolerate dissent." "Neither does the Alliance, really," Maris admitted, finding water and nutrient packs in the lab's emergency supplies. "We just pretend otherwise." As she arranged the sparse provisions, a small view screen in the lab activated automatically, displaying a station-wide announcement. Major Regina Saul's stern face filled the screen, her voice crisp and authoritative. "Attention all personnel. The security alert remains in effect. Evidence confirms Xorath infiltration of Orbital 9. All civilians are reminded that harboring enemy combatants is treason, punishable by immediate execution. Report any suspicious activity to security immediately." The screen shifted to display a symbol Maris didn't recognize. A stylized flame surrounded by 7 stars. "Intelligence suggests the infiltrator may be connected to the Xorath 7th Fleet, commanded by Brigadier General Calreth, a known war criminal responsible for the Titan colony massacre. Exercise extreme caution. This individual is considered highly dangerous." Calreth had gone completely still, his scaled features unreadable as the announcement continued. "In preparation for potential further Xorath aggression, Orbital 9 will host a memorial ceremony for the victims of the Iron Cannon campaign tomorrow at 1400 hours in the Central Assembly Hall. Attendance is mandatory for all off-duty personnel. Security measures will be heightened. That is all." As the screen went dark, Maris turned to Calreth. "War criminal?" she asked quietly. "The Titan colony massacre?" For a long moment, Calreth was silent, his amber eyes fixed on the now blank screen. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with an emotion Maris couldn't immediately identify. "The Titan colony attack occurred 3 years ago. Officially, Xorath forces destroyed the human settlement in retaliation for Alliance strikes against our outer colonies." He met her gaze directly. "I was indeed in command of the fleet nearest Titan at that time." "And," Maris pressed, something in her refusing to believe the worst without hearing his full account. "And I received direct orders from High Command to eliminate the colony." Calreth's voice had gone cold, distant. "Orders I questioned. Orders I delayed implementing while seeking confirmation." "What happened?" "While I hesitated, another commander took initiative. By the time my ships arrived at Titan, the colony was already destroyed." His hands clenched into fists. "I was commended for a massacre I tried to prevent, promoted for decisive action I never took." The bitterness in his voice rang true, matching the emotions Maris had felt during their connection. Still, doubt crept in. Could the Xehanthor be manipulated? Was she being deceived by a skilled enemy operative? "I don't expect you to believe me," Calreth continued, seemingly reading her thoughts. "Words are easily fabricated. That is why I came to Orbital 9, to find evidence, not just of the war's true origins, but of the ongoing deceptions that fuel it." "The memorial ceremony tomorrow," Maris said slowly, a troubling thought forming. "The Iron Cannon campaign. That was when Zorath worlds were bombarded by Alliance forces, right? Calreth nodded grimly. A particularly brutal phase of the war. Nearly 30,000 Zorath civilians killed. Why would they hold a memorial now and make attendance mandatory? Maris wondered aloud. Unless they're planning something, Calreth finished her thought. Using collective grief to justify a new offensive. The implication hung heavy between them. If the Alliance was preparing for a major strike against Zorath territories, it would perpetuate the cycle of violence for perhaps another century. We have to stop it, Maris said suddenly, surprising herself with her vehemence. Somehow, we have to show people the truth. Calreth studied her, with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but wasn't. Even if it means betraying your own government? Your own species? If the truth would end this war, then hiding it is the real betrayal. Maris paced the small lab, mind racing. But how? We'd need actual proof, not just theories. The historical archives, Calreth suggested. That was my original objective. The unaltered records of the initial incidents. Too heavily guarded, Maris shook her head. And even if we could access them, would people believe documents that contradict a century of propaganda? They fell into troubled silence, each considering the seemingly impossible task before them. The memorial ceremony was less than 24 hours away, likely to be followed by an announcement of new military action. The cycle of retaliation would continue, endless and meaningless. Maris's communicator chimed softly. A message from Professor Pharos. Security sweeps continuing. Saul has ordered all civilians back to quarters by 2,000 hours. Return impossible tonight. Be cautious. We'll contact when safe. She showed the message to Calreth. Looks like I'll be staying here tonight. Your absence will be noted, he pointed out. You're placing yourself in greater danger with each passing hour. I know, Maris acknowledged, finding a relatively comfortable position against one of the lab workstations. But I'm already far past the point of no return. As the station's night cycle began, emergency lighting activated in the lab, casting everything in a soft blue glow. Maris found herself studying Calreth's alien features, the elegant cranial ridge that distinguished Northern Clan Zorath, the copper-toned scales that caught the light, the 4 amber eyes that somehow conveyed emotion despite their alienness. You should rest, Calreth said, breaking the silence. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. I'm not sure I can sleep, Maris admitted. Too much to process. Calreth hesitated, then offered. Among my people, there is a meditation technique that calms the mind. It might help. I'd like to try it, Maris said, moving closer. It requires physical contact, Calreth explained. The Xehanthor facilitates the process. Understanding, Maris extended her hand. Calreth took it gently between his larger ones, the scales warm against her skin. The connection bloomed immediately, stronger than before. But instead of the chaotic exchange of emotions they had previously experienced, this felt controlled, directed. Calreth was guiding the energy between them, creating a pattern of calm that gradually spread through Maris's consciousness. Images formed in her mind. Not memories exactly, but impressions. A Zorath sunrise over crystal mountains, the rhythmic sound of alien waves on a copper sandshore, the sensation of floating in warm, buoyant water beneath 3 moons. Gradually, Maris felt her anxiety receding, replaced by a profound peace she hadn't experienced in years, perhaps decades. Her breathing slowed, matching Calreth's deeper rhythm. Thank you, she murmured, feeling sleep approaching at last. As consciousness faded, she was vaguely aware of Calreth carefully arranging his outer garment as a makeshift pillow for her, his touch gentle as he guided her to a more comfortable position. Rest now, Marisvel, he said softly. Tomorrow, we face our greatest challenge yet. Her last thought before sleep claimed her, was that somewhere along this impossible journey, Kalreth had ceased to be the Zorath, or the enemy in her mind. He had become simply Kalreth, a person with his own griefs, hopes, and courage. A person who, against all odds and reason, she had come to trust. And in that trust lay the seed of something that might, just possibly, change everything. Maris awoke to the soft hum of the lab's environmental systems and the subtle glow of morning cycle lighting. For a moment, disoriented, she couldn't remember where she was. Then reality crashed back. The hidden Zorath general, the security sweeps, the memorial ceremony scheduled for today, likely presaging a new military offensive. She sat up, muscles protesting after a night spent on the hard lab floor. Kalreth was across the room, examining one of the research stations with careful attention. "You're awake," he observed, turning toward her. "The meditation served its purpose." "I see. You slept deeply." Maris stretched, nodding. "Better than I have in years, actually. Thank you." "It is a technique we teach our children," Kalreth explained, "to help them manage the first manifestations of Janitor. The emotional transference can be overwhelming without proper training." "Is that why you weren't overwhelmed when we connected?" Maris asked, accepting a nutrient pack he offered her. "I've had a lifetime of training," he replied. "Though I admit, connecting with a human was unexpected, unprecedented, as far as I know." Maris activated her communicator, checking for messages. A station-wide alert reminded all personnel of the mandatory memorial ceremony at 1400 hours. A separate message from Professor Ferros was more concerning. "Security implementing DNA scanning at all checkpoints. Impossible to move, see? Stay where you are. Ceremony preparations underway. Major Saul has requested military reinforcements from Alliance Command. Situation escalating." She showed the message to Kalreth, who read it with grim resignation. "As I suspected, the ceremony will be used to announce new military action against my people." "And we're trapped here," Maris added, "with DNA scanning at checkpoints. There's no way to move you safely." Kalreth was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Perhaps movement isn't necessary." "What do you mean?" "The ceremony is mandatory for all station personnel, correct? Including your Professor Ferros." Maris nodded slowly. "Yes, and it's being held in the Central Assembly Hall, the largest public space on Orbital 9. "A perfect stage," Kalreth murmured, more to himself than to her. Realization dawned on Maris. "You can't seriously be thinking of appearing at the ceremony. They'll kill you on sight." "Perhaps," he acknowledged. "Or perhaps not, if the circumstances are unexpected enough." "This is madness," Maris protested. "Even if you could somehow get past security, which you can't, what would you hope to accomplish? One Zorath against an entire station of humans who've been taught to hate your kind for a century?" Kalreth's 4 eyes fixed on her, with that penetrating gaze she was coming to know well. "Not one Zorath alone," he said quietly, "but a Zorath and a human, together, might be a powerful enough symbol to make people stop and think." The implication struck Maris like a physical blow. "You want me to help you confront the entire station? That's suicide for both of us." "Is it?" Kalreth moved closer, his voice intense but not threatening. "Consider what we've discovered. Maris, the Xanthor connection between us should be impossible, yet it exists. What does that suggest about the supposed natural enmity between our species?" "That it's a lie," Maris admitted reluctantly. "But one demonstration won't undo a century of hatred." "Perhaps not," Kalreth agreed, "but it might create enough doubt to prevent the next century of bloodshed." Maris paced the small lab, mind racing. The rational part of her brain screamed that this was insanity, that even attempting to bring Kalreth to the ceremony would result in their immediate execution. Yet another part, growing stronger by the hour, recognized the terrible logic of his suggestion. They had stumbled upon something unprecedented, a connection between species that had been taught to see each other only as enemies. If that connection could be demonstrated publicly, dramatically. "Even if I agreed," she said finally, "how would we get you into the assembly hall? The security will be beyond anything we've dealt with so far." Calreth moved to one of the lab workstations. This facility contains advanced research equipment, including molecular analysis tools. With your Professor Ferros's expertise, it might be possible to create a temporary genetic mask, something that would allow me to pass the DNA scanners as human, at least briefly. "You're talking about complex genetic manipulation," Maris objected. "That's well beyond my capabilities." "But perhaps not beyond the professor's," Calreth suggested. "And I have some knowledge of such techniques from my military training." Maris stared at him, torn between admiration for his determination and fear of the almost certainly fatal consequences. "You really believe this is worth dying for, don't you?" "I've been fighting in this war for 70 years. Maris Vell," Calreth replied, his voice heavy with the weight of decades. "I've seen entire worlds reduced to ash, generations born and raised knowing nothing but conflict. Yes, I believe ending this cycle is worth any personal cost." His words resonated with something deep within her, the same weary determination that had kept her functioning after losing her family, that had driven her to volunteer in the medical bay despite her exhaustion, that had compelled her to help an injured enemy despite a lifetime of conditioning. "All right," she said finally. "I'll contact Professor Ferros. But I want to be clear about something." She met Calreth's gaze directly. "If we do this, if we somehow survive this, it can't just be a symbolic gesture. We need actual evidence of the war's true origins, something concrete enough to force both governments to acknowledge the deception." "Agreed," Calreth nodded. "The historical archives remain our best hope for that evidence. But first, we must create an opportunity for truth to be heard at all." Maris composed a carefully worded message to Professor Ferros, explaining their desperate plan without including details that might endanger him if the communication was intercepted. His reply came almost immediately. "Meet me in Research Lab 12, adjacent to your current location. Bring your specimen. You're both either braver or more foolish than I imagined. Perhaps both." With the professor's help and Calreth's surprising knowledge of genetic manipulation, they spent the next several hours creating a temporary molecular mask that would allow the Zorath officer to pass human DNA scans for approximately 30 minutes before breaking down. "It's far from perfect," Ferros warned, as he administered the final injection. "The visual disguise is minimal at best. Anyone looking closely will see you're not human. But it should get you past the automated scanners." "That is all we require," Calreth replied, wincing slightly as the compound entered his system. The physical changes were subtle but significant, his copper-toned scales taking on a more muted, skin-like appearance, the distinctive cranial ridge softening. His 4 eyes remained unchanged, but could be concealed behind specialized glasses Professor Ferros provided. "I've arranged emergency medical credentials for both of you," the professor continued, handing them identification badges. "Medical staff are being stationed throughout the ceremony in case of incidents. Keep your head down. Stay at the back of the hall until the right moment." "And when is the right moment?" Maris asked, nerves making her voice sharper than intended. Ferros's expression was grim. "You'll know. Major Saul has prepared quite a spectacle. I've heard rumors of captured Zorath prisoners being displayed as part of the memorial." Calreth tensed visibly. "Prisoners?" "Allegedly captured during recent skirmishes," Ferros confirmed, "though the timing seems suspiciously convenient." Maris felt sick. Using prisoners as propaganda tools violated numerous interstellar treaties, though such considerations had long since been abandoned by both sides in the endless conflict. "If there are Zorath prisoners," Calreth said quietly, then our plan becomes even more essential and more dangerous. You can still back out, Pharos told Maris. Your involvement isn't yet known. You could return to your quarters, claim illness. No, Maris interrupted firmly. I'm committed. She turned to Calreth. We both are. As the time for the ceremony approached, final preparations were made. Calreth would wear medical scrubs and a surgical mask, further obscuring his alien features. Maris, in her role as medical assistant, would guide him. The genetic mask had begun to work, though the discomfort was evident in Calreth's rigid posture. The mask will begin to fail after approximately 30 minutes, Pharos reminded them. You'll feel it happening. Increased pain. Potential cellular degradation. Don't push beyond that limit. Understood, Calreth nodded. Before they departed, Maris found herself alone with Calreth for a moment, while Pharos checked the corridor. Are you certain about this? She asked quietly. Once we're in that hall, there's no turning back. Calreth regarded her with all four eyes, having not yet donned the concealing glasses. I have been fighting this war for longer than you have been alive. Maris Vel, I am weary of death without purpose, of hatred without reason. He extended his hand in the now familiar Zorath gesture of trust. Whatever happens today, know that our connection has given me something I had lost hope of finding again. A belief that our species were meant for something better than endless conflict. Maris took his hand, the Xanthor flowing between them with now familiar warmth. This time, she consciously directed her emotions, wanting him to feel her resolve, her support. The realization struck her with unexpected force. Her genuine care for him as a person, not an alien, not an enemy, but a being of worth and dignity. It's clear, Pharos announced, returning to the lab. We should move now. While the corridors are relatively empty, most personnel are already gathering in the assembly hall. The journey through the station was tense, each checkpoint a moment of breathless anxiety as Calreth's disguise was tested. The genetic mask held automated scanners registering him as human, though with anomalous readings that Pharos quickly explained away as the result of experimental medical treatment. By the time they reached the central assembly hall, the vast space was already nearly full. Thousands of station personnel, military and civilian alike, had gathered for the mandatory ceremony. Giant view screens displayed images of the Iron Cannon campaign, accompanied by solemn music and scrolling lists of casualties. Position yourselves there, Pharos directed, indicating a medical station near the back wall. I must take my place with the senior staff. Remember, 30 minutes, no more. As the professor departed, Maris and Calreth moved to their assigned position, the latter's discomfort increasingly evident. How are you holding up? Maris asked quietly. The mask is uncomfortable, Calreth admitted, his voice strained. But functional, for now. The lights dimmed, signaling the start of the ceremony. Major Regina Saul appeared on the central stage, her black uniform adorned with medals, her expression severe. Citizens of Orbital 9, soldiers of the Human Alliance, she began, her amplified voice filling the vast hall. We gather today to honor the victims of the Iron Cannon campaign, a brutal attack that claimed 30,000 innocent lives 20 years ago. These were not soldiers, not warriors, but men, women, and children whose only crime was being human. On the screens above, images of devastation played, burning settlements, grieving survivors, makeshift memorials. The crowd watched in solemn silence, many with expressions of barely contained anger. For 100 years, Sul continued, we have faced an enemy that knows no mercy, no compassion, no honor. The Zorath seek not merely to defeat us, but to eradicate humanity entirely from the galaxy. Calreth tensed beside Maris, his breathing becoming more labored as the genetic mask taxed his system. Today, as we remember our fallen, we also look to the future. Sul's voice took on a harder edge. A future where humanity will no longer live under the shadow of Zorath aggression. A future secured by decisive action. She gestured sharply, and a section of the stage floor slid open. Rising from below, a transparent containment cell appeared, holding 3 Zorath figures, 2 males and 1 female, all wearing tattered military uniforms with insignia that had been deliberately defaced. A murmur ran through the crowd, a mixture of surprise, vindication, and the ugly sound of hatred finding its target. "These prisoners," Sul announced, "were captured during a failed attack on our outer colonies. They represent the leadership of the Zorath 8th Strike Force, responsible for the deaths of over 5,000 Alliance citizens in the past year alone." Maris felt Calreth go completely still beside her, his eyes fixed on the prisoners. "Those are not military personnel," he whispered, horror evident in his voice despite the translator. "Those are diplomatic staff. I recognize the female, Sharvex, junior envoy to the neutral territories." "Today," Sul continued, unaware of the growing tension at the back of the hall, "I am authorized to announce that the Human Alliance has developed a new defensive capability, one that will ensure no more innocent human lives are lost to Zorath aggression." On the screens, technical schematics appeared, a weapons platform of massive proportions. Its capabilities listed in clinical military terminology that nonetheless made its purpose clear. Not defense, but annihilation. "The Terminus Protocol will target key Zorath military installations," Sol explained, her voice now almost triumphant. "The first deployment is scheduled for Zo 600 tomorrow, striking at the heart of Zorath command structure." Calreth swayed slightly, gripping the medical station for support. "Those coordinates," he said, voice barely audible. "That's not a military installation. It's Varathnar, a cultural heritage site. Population 11 million. Mostly civilians." Maris felt sick. This wasn't a memorial. It was a prelude to genocide. "The time for half measures is over," Sul declared to the increasingly enthusiastic crowd. "One decisive strike to cripple their command structure, followed by systematic elimination of their military capabilities. Within 1 year, the Zorath threat will be permanently neutralized." "I can't maintain the mask much longer," Calreth whispered, pain evident in his voice. "The cellular degradation is accelerating." Maris made her decision. "Then we move now." Without waiting for a response, she grabbed a medical kit and began moving toward the stage, pulling Calreth alongside her. They moved with purpose, using their medical credentials to pass through the crowd, which parted automatically for what appeared to be emergency medical personnel. "And so we remember the fallen," Sul was saying, reaching the crescendo of her speech, "by ensuring that their sacrifice was not in vain, that humanity will—" She broke off as Maris and Calreth reached the edge of the stage, security personnel moving to intercept them. "Medical emergency," Maris called out, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "Please, we need access to the stage." Sol's expression darkened with annoyance. "This is hardly the time." "It's exactly the time," Maris interrupted, feeling a strange calm descend over her despite the enormity of what she was doing. "Before any more lives are lost to lies." With that, she stepped onto the stage, pulling Calreth with her. The security officers hesitated, confused by their medical credentials and authoritative manner. Major Sol's hand moved to her sidearm. "Who authorized you to interrupt this ceremony? Identify yourselves immediately." Maris felt Calreth straighten beside her, his hand finding hers in the gesture that had come to mean so much. The Xehanthor flowed between them, stronger than ever despite the failing genetic mask, or perhaps because of it, as his natural Zorath abilities reasserted themselves. "My name is Maris Vel," she announced, her voice steady and clear. "I am a janitor on this station, and this—" She turned to Calreth, who with deliberate movements removed his surgical mask and specialized glasses, revealing his true nature to the stunned assembly. Is Brigadier General Cal Reth of the Zorath 7th Fleet. Chaos erupted immediately. Security personnel drew weapons, civilians screamed, military officers shouted conflicting orders. Sol's face contorted with rage as she aimed her weapon directly at Cal Reth. "Traitor!" she snarled at Maris. "You've smuggled an enemy commander onto this station!" "No," Maris replied, raising her voice to be heard above the pandemonium. "I helped an injured person. I listened to someone who wants this war to end. And I discovered that everything we've been told, everything that justifies this endless conflict, is built on lies." "Lies?" Sol's laugh was harsh, incredulous. "The only lie is that peace with these monsters is possible. Security, arrest them both. The human for treason, the Zorath for execution." Armed officers moved forward, but Cal Reth stepped protectively in front of Maris, his voice carrying despite the uproar. "If you truly honor your fallen," he addressed the crowd directly, "listen before you condemn. For 100 years, both our peoples have been manipulated into hating each other, while those in power profit from our mutual destruction." "Silence him!" Sol ordered. But something in Cal Reth's dignified bearing gave the security officers pause. "Your Major Sol speaks of a new weapon," Cal Reth continued, visibly fighting through the pain of the deteriorating genetic mask. "A weapon targeted not at military installations, but at civilian populations. Just as your Iron Cannon campaign was not a Zorath attack on military targets, but a false flag operation designed to justify escalation." Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. Sol's face flushed with fury. "These are desperate lies from a desperate enemy. Security, I order you to—" "The coordinates displayed for tomorrow's strike," Cal Reth interrupted, his voice growing stronger despite his physical distress. "Target Varathnar, a cultural center housing 11 million civilians, including 3 million children." This revelation sent a new wave of disquiet through the assembly. Even dedicated military personnel seemed disturbed by the implication. Sol raised her weapon, aiming directly at Cal Reth's head. "Enough! One more word and I'll execute you myself. Alien!" What happened next occurred so quickly that later accounts would differ wildly. As Sol's finger tightened on the trigger, Maris moved, not away from danger, but directly into it. She stepped in front of Cal Reth, arms outspread, facing the weapon without flinching. "If you want to kill him," she declared, loud enough for all to hear, "you'll have to kill me first. And then, you'll have to explain why executing an unarmed janitor was necessary for humanity's survival." The entire hall went silent, in that breathless moment, with the weapon still trained on her. Maris turned to Cal Reth. Their eyes met, all 6 of them, as his 4 amber orbs regarded her with an emotion too complex for words. Without hesitation, without calculation, Maris did the one thing no one in that assembly could have anticipated. She embraced Cal Reth, wrapping her arms around him in a gesture so human, so universal in its meaning, that it transcended species and politics in a century of engineered hatred. The Xanthor exploded between them, not just a connection, but a broadcast. Wave after wave of emotion radiated outward. Cal Reth's weariness with war, his hope for reconciliation, his genuine respect for humanity despite decades of conditioning. Maris's compassion, her courage, her belief that people, all people, human or Zorath, deserved better than endless conflict. The energy was palpable, visible as a subtle aurora that enveloped them both and then expanded outward. The nearest security officers staggered back, expressions of shock giving way to confusion, then wonder. Major Sol alone seemed immune, her weapon still raised. This is some kind of Zorath mind control," she shouted, though her voice lacked conviction. "Don't let them affect you." But it was too late. The Xanthor had touched too many minds, revealed too many emotional truths. In the containment cell, the Zorath prisoners had risen to their feet, staring in disbelief at the spectacle before them. Professor Ferros rushed forward from the senior staff section, placing himself between Sol and the embracing pair. "Lower your weapon, Major," he commanded, with unexpected authority. "What you're witnessing is Xanthor, a Zorath ability to share emotional truth. It cannot lie, cannot manipulate. It can only reveal." "Then it's all the more dangerous," Sul snarled, though her weapon hand had begun to tremble. "It's alien influence on human minds." "No," came a new voice, one of the security officers who had been nearest to Maris and Calreth when the Xanthor expanded. "It's understanding. I felt it. Their emotions, their memories." The young man looked dazed but certain. "There's no deception in it." Others, who had been touched by the expanding energy, were nodding, expressions transforming from fear to confusion to something approaching wonder. "This is a trick," Sul insisted, her voice rising with desperation. "A Zorath manipulation. They've always been masters of deception." But her words found little purchase in the transformed atmosphere of the hall. The Xanthor continued to pulse outward in gentle waves, touching more minds, revealing more truth. It wasn't invasive or controlling. Rather, it created a space where emotional barriers dissolved, where the shared experiences of suffering, loss, and hope transcended species. Calreth's voice rose above the murmurs, strained but clear. "For a century, we have been told that our differences make coexistence impossible, that one species must dominate for the other to survive." He remained within Maris's embrace, their connection visibly manifesting as a soft aurora around them. But what if that was the true deception? What if we were meant not for war, but for understanding? The effects of the failed genetic mask were becoming more apparent, his scaled skin returning fully to its natural copper hue, his features shifting back to their Zorath configuration. Yet strangely, this transformation seemed to strengthen rather than diminish the impact of his words. "Look at those coordinates again," he continued, gesturing toward the displays, still showing the targets for the Terminus Protocol. "Verify for yourselves what they truly designate. Not military installations, civilian populations." Professor Ferros moved to a control console, quickly bringing up navigation charts and population databases. The hall watched in tense silence as he cross-referenced the coordinates Saul had displayed. "He's right," Ferros announced, his voice heavy with shock despite his prior suspicions. "These are cultural and population centers. The primary target, Vareth Nar, houses the largest Zorath historical archive and medical research facility in the sector. Military presence is minimal, less than 2% of the population." A wave of disquiet moved through the assembly. Sol's authority was visibly crumbling as doubt spread. "The same deception has guided this war from its beginning," Calreth pressed, his voice growing weaker as the biological strain took its toll. "The attack on New Sydney that human authorities blamed on Zorath forces? Our records show a mysterious assault that our government attributed to Alliance aggression." Maris stepped forward, still keeping one hand connected to Calreth, maintaining their bond. "How many of you have lost family to this war?" she asked, addressing the crowd directly. "How many have sacrificed everything for a conflict that serves only those in power? What if everything we've believed about the Zorath, and everything they've believed about us, was engineered to keep us fighting?" In the containment cell, the female Zorath diplomat, Sharvex, called out in a voice made scratchy by the translator. "Brigadier General Calreth speaks truth. We were a diplomatic mission to the neutral territories, seeking dialogue with human representatives. Our ship was attacked without warning and designated as a military assault force in Alliance communications." Major Sol's composure finally broke. "Enough of this sedition!" she shouted, finger tightening on the trigger of her weapon. "I will not allow a century of sacrifice to be undone by alien manipulation." The shot rang out, echoing through the suddenly silent hall. But it wasn't Calreth who fell. It was Professor Pharos, who had lunged in front of the Zorath general at the last second. The elderly scientist crumpled to the stage, blood spreading across his white laboratory coat. The act of violence shattered the fragile moment of understanding. Security forces moved forward, some toward Saul, others toward Maris and Calreth. The crowd's reaction was mixed: shock, anger, confusion. Calreth knelt beside the fallen professor, hands pressed to the wound, in an attempt to staunch the bleeding. "Why?" he asked, genuine anguish in his voice. "Why sacrifice yourself for an enemy?" Pharos's eyes flickered open, his voice barely audible. "Not enemy. Never was. Just another person." His gaze moved to Maris. "The archives. Sub-level 3. Security code Origa 79. The truth is there." As medical personnel rushed forward, Calreth stood, his imposing figure somehow both alien and deeply familiar after the shared experience of the Xehanthor. He faced the assembly, 4 amber eyes sweeping across the thousands of faces. "This has gone far enough," he declared, voice carrying despite his physical distress. "Too much blood has been shed, human and Zorath alike. I offer myself into Alliance custody, willingly, with one condition." The hall waited, breath held collectively. "That representatives from both our peoples examine the historical archives together. That we finally confront the truth about how this war began, and who truly benefits from its continuation." Major Saul, now restrained by her own security officers after the shooting of Professor Pharos, laughed bitterly. "You expect us to believe a Zorath commander suddenly cares about peace, after a century of war?" Calreth's gaze fell on her with ancient sadness. "I was a diplomat before I was a soldier. Major Saul. Many of us were. I did not choose war. It was chosen for me, as it was for you." His voice softened. "I felt your grief in the Xehanthor, the family you lost, the pain that drives you." Saul flinched as if physically struck, her composure cracking further. "I do not ask you to forget," Calreth continued. "Only to question, to look beyond what we have been told, to what might actually be true." A new voice entered the conversation, Admiral Vega, the highest-ranking military officer on Orbital 9, who had been observing the proceedings with calculating attention. "Lower your weapons," he ordered the security forces. "All of them." The command was obeyed instantly, though with visible confusion. Admiral Vega stepped onto the stage, his weathered face unreadable. He studied Calreth for a long moment before speaking. "I've fought your kind for 40 years. General. Lost more friends than I can count. Gave orders that sent thousands to their deaths." He paused, the weight of decades evident in his bearing. "And not once, in all that time, did anyone question why we were fighting. Not really." He turned to address the assembly. "The Terminus Protocol was presented to me as a strategic military operation. I approved the coordinates without verification, trusting the intelligence provided." The admission clearly cost him. If what Professor Pharos displayed is accurate, if we are targeting civilian populations, then we have become what we claim to be fighting against. A stunned silence followed this declaration from such a high-ranking officer. "I am hereby ordering a 24-hour suspension of all offensive operations," Admiral Vega continued. "And I am authorizing a joint Human Zorath Commission to examine the historical archives regarding the origin of this conflict." He turned back to Calreth. "You will remain in protective custody, not as a prisoner of war, but as a diplomatic representative of the Zorath Federation." Murmurs spread through the crowd, shock, disbelief, and in some cases, the first tentative stirrings of hope. "Medical team to the stage," Vega ordered. "Attend to Professor Pharos and ensure General Calreth receives proper treatment for his condition." As medical personnel rushed forward, Maris finally released her physical contact with Calreth, though the effects of their prolonged Xanthor connection lingered. She felt simultaneously drained and energized, as if something fundamental had shifted, not just in the external world, but within herself. "What you did," Calreth said quietly, for her alone as the medical team approached, "took more courage than any battlefield action I have witnessed in 70 years of war." "I just couldn't let it continue," Maris replied simply. "Not when I knew there was another way." As they were separated, Calreth, taken to receive medical treatment for the cellular damage caused by the failed genetic mask. Maris escorted to a secure debriefing room. Neither could have predicted the cascading effects their actions would have throughout human and Zorath space in the hours and days to come. The image of a human woman embracing a Zorath general on the stage of Orbital 9's Central Assembly Hall would be transmitted across both civilizations, sometimes as propaganda, sometimes as scandal, but increasingly as a symbol of a different possibility, a challenge to a century of hatred, a question mark where before there had been only absolute certainty. Maris Vell was just a janitor, but in that crucial moment, she had become something more, a bridge between worlds that had forgotten they could be connected. The medical isolation chamber was eerily quiet. The only sounds the soft hum of monitoring equipment and the occasional rustle of movement as Maris shifted in her uncomfortable chair. 3 days had passed since the dramatic confrontation in the Central Assembly Hall. 3 days of isolation and interrogation and uncertainty. Across the room, Calreth lay on a specially configured medical bed, his copper-scaled body connected to various monitoring devices. The cellular damage from the failed genetic mask had been severe, requiring intensive treatment and regeneration therapy. He had been unconscious for most of the past 72 hours, his body focusing its energy on healing. Maris had refused to leave his side, despite repeated attempts by both medical staff and security personnel to remove her. Admiral Vega's direct intervention had finally secured her permission to remain, though under constant surveillance and with strict limitations on communication with the outside world. Professor Ferros had survived his injury, though he remained in critical condition. The latest report indicated he had regained consciousness briefly, long enough to provide access codes to the most deeply classified sections of the historical archives. A soft tone from one of the monitoring devices drew Maris's attention back to Calreth. His vital signs were shifting, the brain activity indicators showing increased function. As she watched, his 4 eyes opened slowly, blinking against the harsh medical lighting. "You're still here," he observed, his voice rough from disuse. "Where else would I be?" Maris replied, moving closer to his bedside. Calreth attempted to sit up, grimacing with the effort. "How long?" 3 days, she told him, adjusting the bed controls to help him into a more comfortable position. The genetic mask caused significant cellular degradation. The doctors weren't sure you'd recover. "Zorath physiology is resilient," he said, though the strain in his voice belied his casual tone. "The damage will heal." His amber eyes studied her face. "You look exhausted." Maris gave a small, tired smile. "It's been intense. Endless questions from military intelligence, medical examinations, psychological evaluations." "The Xanthor," Calreth guessed. "They want to understand how a human could experience it." "They're equal parts fascinated and terrified," she confirmed. "Dr. Kess has been running tests, trying to determine if I have some genetic anomaly that allows the connection." "And?" "Nothing conclusive, physically. I'm completely ordinary." Maris hesitated, then added, "But the effect wasn't just between us. Over 300 people in that hall reported experiencing some degree of the Xanthor when I hugged you." Calreth was silent for a moment, absorbing this information. "Such widespread connection is unprecedented, even among my people. The Xanthor is typically limited to direct contact, and only between individuals with compatible neurological patterns." He regarded her with new intensity. What happened between us defies explanation by either human or Zorath science. Before Maris could respond, the chamber door slid open to admit Admiral Vega, accompanied by two aides carrying data tablets. The military commander looked even more weathered than he had during the ceremony. Deep lines etched around his eyes, suggesting sleepless nights. General Calreth, Vega acknowledged with a formal nod. Good to see you conscious. Our medical team was concerned. Admiral, Calreth returned the greeting with equal formality. I understand I have you to thank for my current status as diplomatic representative, rather than prisoner of war. Vega's expression remained neutral. Don't thank me yet. The situation remains fluid. He turned to the aides. Leave us. Once they had departed, Vega's rigid posture relaxed slightly. He pulled a chair closer to the bed, positioning himself where both Maris and Calreth could see him clearly. I've spent the past 3 days reviewing historical archives that haven't been accessed in nearly a century, he began, without preamble. Using Professor Ferros's security codes, we've been able to examine unredacted records from the period immediately preceding and following the New Sydney incident. Maris leaned forward, heart quickening. And? Vega's weathered face showed the first cracks of emotion, a profound weariness tinged with something like shame. It appears General Calreth's suspicions were correct. The attack on New Sydney that allegedly initiated the war was not conducted by Zorath forces. Calreth went very still. Then who? A third party, Vega replied grimly. Mercenaries hired by a consortium of corporations that stood to profit from military contracts in the event of interspecies conflict. He handed Maris a data tablet. The evidence is compelling. Financial transfers, communication records, technical specifications matching the weapons used. Maris scrolled through the information, horror growing with each new detail. They deliberately attacked civilian targets, both human and Zorath, and ensured each side would blame the other. Precisely, Vega confirmed. And when diplomatic channels might have revealed the deception, key personnel on both sides were strategically eliminated. Records were altered. The narrative was controlled. And 100 years of war followed, Calreth said quietly. Billions dead, civilization stunted, all for profit. Vega nodded once, his expression grim. The consortium evolved over time, adapting to maintain influence within both human and Zorath power structures. The current iteration appears to be the Helix Consortium, which, coincidentally, developed the Terminus protocol targeting Zorath civilian centers. Maris felt physically ill as the implications sank in. Major Saul? A willing participant, though likely unaware of the full historical context. Vega replied. She has been relieved of duty and is under investigation. Her hatred of Zorath was genuine. The consortium simply exploited it. Calreth's 4 eyes narrowed in thought. This information must be made public, to both our peoples. That process has already begun, Vega confirmed. I've transmitted the unredacted archives to both Alliance Command and, through secure channels provided by your captured diplomatic staff, to the Zorath High Council. The response? Calreth asked. Vega's expression suggested the answer was complicated. Mixed, as you might expect. Denial. Accusations of forgery. But also cautious interest. Questions. Requests for verification. He leaned forward slightly. And proposals for direct communication. The first in a century. The significance of this hung in the air between them. After 100 years of having all diplomatic channels severed, even the possibility of direct communication represented a seismic shift. There's more, Vega continued after a moment. Footage of what happened in the assembly hall has spread throughout both human and Zorath space. The Xanthor connection, the visible energy between you, has created something of a phenomenon. What kind of phenomenon? Maris asked. People are questioning. On both sides. Vega ran a hand over his face, the gesture betraying his exhaustion. And there have been reports of other instances, isolated cases of humans and Zorath experiencing similar connections when in close proximity. Not as powerful as what you demonstrated, but significant nonetheless. Calreth exchanged a glance with Maris, understanding passing between them without words. The Xanthor was never exclusive to Zorath, he said slowly, as if working through a complex puzzle. It was simply that we had cultivated the ability, while we were taught to fear and hate instead of connect, Maris finished. To see differences instead of commonalities. Vega nodded, a hint of something like hope breaking through his professional demeanor. Which brings me to the purpose of my visit. In 12 hours, a delegation from the Zorath High Council will arrive at Orbital 9 for preliminary diplomatic discussions. They've specifically requested the presence of both of you. The news struck Maris with the force of a physical blow. Me? But I'm just a janitor who changed the course of a 100-year war. Vega finished for her. Like it or not, Ms. Vel, you've become a symbol. Your embrace with General Calreth has been seen by billions across 2 civilizations. The weight of this responsibility settled over Maris like a heavy cloak. She had acted on instinct, on compassion, not with the intention of becoming a political symbol or diplomatic catalyst. There will be resistance, Calreth warned, his voice serious. Powerful interests have maintained this conflict for a century. They will not surrender their influence easily. We're already seeing evidence of that, Vega agreed grimly. Attempts to discredit the archive findings. Propaganda suggesting the Xanthor is a form of mind control. Isolated attacks on individuals advocating for diplomatic solutions. And yet you're proceeding with these preliminary talks, Maris observed. Vega's expression hardened with determination. I've given orders that sent thousands to their deaths in this war. Ms. Vel, I've believed in its necessity for my entire career. He paused, the admission clearly difficult. If there's even a chance that it has all been based on lies, that it could end, I have a moral obligation to pursue that chance. As do I, Calreth agreed. Though my recovery may not be complete in 12 hours. Medical staff will ensure you're sufficiently stable, Vega assured him, rising to leave. Rest while you can. The coming days will be challenging. After the Admiral's departure, Maris and Calreth sat in thoughtful silence, each processing the enormity of what was unfolding. Are you afraid? Calreth asked finally. Terrified, Maris admitted. I'm not a diplomat or a politician. I don't know how to negotiate peace treaties or address councils. Neither was I, once, Calreth reminded her. Before I became a soldier, I was simply a scholar with an interest in other cultures. His expression softened. But you have something more valuable than diplomatic training. Maris Vel. What's that? Authenticity, he replied simply. You acted from genuine compassion, not political calculation. That is why the Xanthor manifested so powerfully between us. And that is what both our peoples need to witness now. Not clever negotiations, but genuine connection. Maris considered this, finding unexpected comfort in his assessment. Do you really believe it's possible? Peace, after 100 years of war? I believe it is necessary, Calreth said. Whether it is possible depends on how many others are willing to do what you did, to see beyond conditioned hatred to the person beneath. As if drawn by some unspoken impulse, Maris extended her hand. Calreth took it without hesitation, their fingers intertwining, 5 human digits with the 4 longer scaled fingers of a Zorath. The Xanthor bloomed between them, gentler now, but no less profound. In that connection, without words, they shared their fears and hopes for what was to come. The path ahead would not be easy or straight. A century of hatred could not be undone in a moment, no matter how powerful. There would be setbacks, resistance, perhaps even violence from those who could not imagine a different way of being. But something had changed. A door had opened that had been sealed shut for generations. And through that door, however narrow, a different future might be glimpsed. Maris Vell was just a janitor. Cal Reth had been forced from diplomat to soldier. Neither had sought to become symbols or catalysts. Yet, in their unlikely connection, lay the seed of a transformation neither civilization had dared to imagine possible. The embrace that had shocked Orbital 9 might, just possibly, begin to heal 100 years of wounds. The ceremonial chamber aboard Orbital 9 had been hastily repurposed for the historic meeting. Once a military briefing room, it now featured a circular table with equal seating for both human and Zorath representatives. The Alliance emblem had been removed from the wall, replaced by a neutral starfield projection. Armed guards from both species stood at the perimeter, watching each other with tense alertness. Maris felt profoundly out of place among the assembled dignitaries. Where others wore formal military uniforms or elaborate diplomatic attire, she had only a simple civilian dress provided by station services. She had refused offers of more formal clothing, insisting that she appear as what she truly was, an ordinary person caught up in extraordinary events. Cal Reth sat beside her, his imposing figure now fully recovered from the genetic mask's effects. He wore traditional Zorath diplomatic garb, an intricately embroidered robe that left his scaled arms bare, signifying openness and honesty in Zorath culture. The contrast between them could not have been more stark. The copper-scaled, four-eyed alien general and the unassuming human janitor. Yet it was precisely this unlikely pairing that had captivated the imagination of both civilizations. In the weeks since the confrontation in the assembly hall, their embrace had become a powerful symbol, reproduced in artwork, referenced in speeches, debated in forums across human and Zorath space alike. Admiral Vega entered the chamber, followed by 3 senior Alliance officials. From the opposite door came the Zorath delegation, 4 representatives of the High Council, their elaborate cranial ridges and formal markings indicating their elevated status. The lead Zorath, Elder Tharvax, paused upon seeing Cal Reth, a complex emotion passing across his alien features. Brigadier General, he acknowledged, using the formal military title rather than Cal Reth's former diplomatic rank. Your survival is unexpected. As is this meeting, Elder, Cal Reth replied evenly. Yet here we stand. The delegations took their places around the circular table, the symbolism of equal positioning not lost on anyone present. Maris found herself directly across from Elder Tharvax, his 4 eyes studying her with unconcealed curiosity. This human, the Elder addressed Cal Reth rather than Maris directly, is the one who experienced Janitor? Before Cal Reth could answer, Maris spoke for herself. My name is Maris Vell, she said clearly. And yes, I experienced the connection with Cal Reth. Tharvax's secondary eyes narrowed slightly, a sign of surprise in Zorath body language. You speak directly, unusual for a human of non-leadership status. Perhaps that's part of the problem, Maris replied. Too many years of only leaders speaking to leaders, while ordinary people remained silent. A ripple of discomfort passed through both delegations at this breach of diplomatic protocol. But Admiral Vega intervened smoothly. Ms. Vell's unique perspective is precisely why she has been included in these discussions, he explained. Her actions, however unconventional, created the opportunity for this historic meeting. Elder Tharvax inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement before addressing the assembled group. The information transmitted to the High Council regarding the true origins of this conflict is disturbing. Our historians are still verifying the documentation, but preliminary analysis suggests its authenticity. Alliance archivists have reached the same conclusion. One of the human officials confirmed. The evidence indicates deliberate manipulation by corporate interests to initiate and perpetuate hostilities between our peoples. 100 years of war, another Zorath representative said bitterly. Billions dead, civilizations stunted, all for profit. Not only profit, Calreth interjected. Power, control. The prevention of what might have been possible had our species continued their initial peaceful contact. All eyes turned to him, and he continued with the authority of someone who had considered these matters deeply. Before the New Sydney incident, human and Zorath cultural exchange was accelerating. Scientific collaboration was yielding remarkable advances. Economic integration was beginning to flourish. A threat to those who prospered from isolation and competition, Elder Tharvax concluded. Admiral Vega leaned forward. The question before us now is not only how we acknowledge this deception, but how we move forward from it. Can a century of hatred simply be dismissed? One of the human officials asked skeptically. Even with proof of manipulation, the wounds run deep on both sides. Which is why we are not here to sign peace treaties or form alliances, Vega clarified. This is merely the beginning of a conversation, one that must eventually include citizens at all levels of both societies. Calreth nodded in agreement. The Xanthor between myself and Maris was not an isolated phenomenon. Reports are emerging throughout border regions of similar connections, forming between humans and Zorath, who approach each other without preconceived hostility. These reports are concerning to many in the High Council, Elder Tharvax admitted. The Xanthor has been considered an exclusively Zorath ability for millennia. Its manifestation with humans challenges fundamental aspects of our cultural identity. Or perhaps, Maris suggested quietly, it reveals a truth your culture has always known but forgotten, that connection transcends physical differences. Another uncomfortable silence fell over the gathering. Maris had again violated the careful diplomatic dance, speaking a truth too directly. To everyone's surprise, Elder Tharvax laughed, a sound rarely heard by human ears. You are indeed unusual, Maris Vel. In Zorath tradition, only those of highest rank may speak so plainly to an elder. His 4 eyes regarded her with new respect. Yet, perhaps that is exactly what this moment requires, plain speaking after a century of carefully constructed lies. The tension in the room eased slightly. Admiral Vega seized the opening to propose a structured agenda for the preliminary talks, beginning with a joint historical commission to establish a shared understanding of the conflict's true timeline, followed by immediate de-escalation measures in contested regions. As the discussions proceeded, Maris found herself watching the interactions with a sense of wonder. Here were representatives of civilizations that had been locked in mortal combat for 100 years. Now, sitting at the same table, speaking words of cautious hope rather than threats and ultimatums. Not everyone was fully committed to the process. She could see resistance in the rigid posture of one human official, skepticism in the guarded responses of a Zorath counselor. Peace would not come easily or quickly. The machinery of war, once set in motion, developed its own momentum that resisted all attempts to halt it. Yet something had undeniably changed. A possibility existed now that had been unimaginable just days earlier. During a brief recess, Maris found herself approached by Elder Tharvax, who had deliberately separated from his delegation to speak with her privately. The High Council is curious, he said without preamble. What did you experience in the Xanthor with Calreth? Maris considered the question carefully. Truth, she finally answered. Not facts or specific memories, but emotional truth. His weariness with war, his hope for something better, his recognition of shared humanity. Though that's not quite the right word. Personhood, perhaps, Tharvax suggested. The quality that transcends species. Yes, Maris nodded. Exactly that. The elder's 4 eyes studied her intently. And did you feel fear? Revulsion at connecting with an alien mind? No, Maris replied honestly. It felt right, natural even, as if we'd been designed to connect this way, but had forgotten how. Tharvax was silent for a long moment before responding. There are ancient texts in our historical archives that speak of a time before the Great Divergence, when our ancestors supposedly shared deeper connections with other sentient species. These accounts have been dismissed as mythology by modern scholars. He paused thoughtfully. Perhaps we have been too quick to separate history from legend. Before Maris could respond, alarms suddenly blared throughout the station. The chamber's communication system activated automatically. Security alert! All personnel to emergency stations. Unauthorized weapons discharge in Docking Bay 7. This is not a drill. The peaceful atmosphere of the diplomatic chamber shattered instantly. Guards moved to protective positions. Delegations clustered together in defensive formations. Admiral Vega activated his command interface. Report! The response came through clearly enough for all to hear. Sir, armed insurgents have breached security at Docking Bay 7. They're wearing Alliance military uniforms but using non-standard tactics. Current casualty count is 6 security personnel and, Sir, 3 members of the Zorath diplomatic support staff have been killed. The Zorath delegation reacted with visible anger, scales rising in a threat display. Elder Tharvax turned accusatory eyes toward Admiral Vega. Is this how the Alliance conducts peace talks? With assassination squads? This is not an Alliance operation, Vega responded firmly, already issuing counter orders through his interface. All authorized personnel are accounted for. The Helix Consortium, Kalreth said grimly, rising to his feet. They would not surrender a century of profit without resistance. As if confirming his assessment, the communication system crackled again. Admiral, the attackers are attempting to reach the diplomatic chamber. They've stated their intention to... The transmission cut off abruptly. Evacuate both delegations immediately, Vega ordered, his military training taking over. Secure routes to emergency shuttles on level A3. As security personnel moved to implement this order, chaos erupted in the corridor outside. The sound of weapons fire echoed through the sealed doors, followed by an ominous silence. They're here, Kalreth said quietly, moving to stand protectively near Maris. And they will not distinguish between human and Zorath targets. The diplomatic chamber had only 2 exits, both now potentially compromised. The delegations found themselves trapped, armed only with the ceremonial weapons carried by their security details, woefully inadequate against a well-equipped assault team. In that moment of crisis, something remarkable occurred. Without discussion or formal agreement, the human and Zorath security personnel began to coordinate their defense. Centuries-old enemies, they seamlessly integrated their positions, covering each other's vulnerabilities, communicating through terse gestures and nods. Elder Tharvax observed this with visible surprise. They worked together as if they had trained for years. Soldiers recognize soldiers, Admiral Vega replied simply, regardless of species. The main door's locking mechanism began to glow red, the sign of a high-powered cutting tool being applied from the other side. Within minutes, the attackers would breach the chamber. In the tense moment before the inevitable assault, Maris found Kalreth's hand seeking hers, their fingers intertwined, the now familiar warmth of Janitor flowing between them. But this time, something different happened. The connection didn't remain contained between them. Instead, it expanded outward in gentle waves, touching everyone in the chamber. Human and Zorath alike froze momentarily as the sensation washed over them, not invasive or controlling, but connecting, revealing. "What is this?" one of the human officials whispered, eyes wide. "The Greater Xanthor," Elder Tharvax replied with awe. "Spoken of in ancient texts, but not experienced in living memory. The connection that transcends not just individuals, but groups." The effect was profound and immediate. Where moments before there had been 2 distinct delegations with their separate security details, now there stood a unified group, bound by a shared understanding that transcended words or formal agreements. As the door began to yield to the cutting tools, Admiral Vega stepped forward. "We stand together," he said simply. Elder Tharvax moved to his side, the traditional gesture of Zorath solidarity. As one. When the attackers finally breached the chamber, a dozen heavily armed mercenaries in stolen Alliance uniforms, they faced not the divided, vulnerable targets they had expected, but a unified front of humans and Zorath, positioned strategically throughout the room, armed with both weapons and an unshakable resolve. The firefight was brief, but intense. The mercenaries, though well-equipped, had not anticipated the coordinated resistance. Caught off guard by the unified defense, they were quickly overwhelmed. In the aftermath, as the wounded from both species were attended to without distinction, Maris found herself standing amidst a scene that would have been unimaginable just days earlier. Humans bandaging Zorath injuries. Zorath applying their advanced healing techniques to human wounds, all without hesitation or disgust. "It would seem," Calreth observed quietly at her side, "that when survival is at stake, our species remember how to cooperate rather quickly. The question is whether we can maintain that cooperation without the immediate threat," Maris replied. Calreth's expression was thoughtful. "The Xanthor that manifested between us in the assembly hall has continued to spread. This attack, intended to derail peace, may instead accelerate it." Analysis of the captured mercenaries confirmed Calreth's suspicion. They were indeed agents of the Helix Consortium, dispatched with the explicit purpose of sabotaging the peace talks by creating a new incident to reignite hostilities between humans and Zorath. Their failure became the catalyst for something unexpected. Footage of humans and Zorath defending each other, treating each other's wounds, standing unified against a common enemy. This spread throughout both civilizations even more rapidly than the initial embrace had done. When the formal peace talks resumed 3 days later, they did so with expanded delegations and increased security. But more importantly, they proceeded with a new foundation, not just diplomatic necessity or historical revelation, but shared experience. The delegations had faced death together and chosen to stand as one. Maris Vell, once just a janitor moving invisibly through the corridors of Orbital 9, found herself at the center of a transformation neither she nor anyone else could have predicted. The simple act of compassion that had led her to help an injured enemy had cascaded into something that was reshaping two civilizations. As she sat beside Calreth at the expanded diplomatic table, listening to the first tentative proposals for lasting peace, Maris reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. She had not sought importance or recognition. She had simply acted from the most basic human impulse, to alleviate suffering where she found it. In doing so, she had revealed a truth that a century of war had obscured, that beneath the scales or skin, beyond the 2 eyes or 4, past all the constructed differences and carefully nurtured hatreds, existed beings capable of connection, understanding, and growth. The path forward would not be easy. 100 years of conflict had left deep scars on both civilizations. Trust would be built slowly, painstakingly, with inevitable setbacks and continued resistance from those who profited from division. But something irreversible had begun. A door, once thought permanently sealed, had been opened. Through it, both humans and Zorath could glimpse a different future, one in which their shared galaxy might become a place of collaboration rather than conflict, of exchange rather than extermination. "Are you ready?" Calreth asked quietly as they prepared to address the assembled delegations, their story now formally incorporated into the historical record of both species. Maris looked around the chamber at the faces watching them, human and Zorath, military and civilian, hopeful and skeptical. She thought of Professor Pharos, now recovering but permanently marked by his brave intervention. Of the thousands who had experienced the Xanthor connection, directly or indirectly, and whose perspective had been forever altered. Of the billions more who might, given the chance, discover their own capacity for connection across the boundaries of species. Yes, she replied simply, taking Calreth's offered hand. The Xanthor bloomed between them, warm and familiar now. I'm ready. Together, they rose to speak, the janitor and the general who had embraced on a stage and begun to end a 100-year war. In that moment, Maris understood that the true power of their story lay not in its drama or uniqueness, but in its simplicity and universality. She had been just a janitor. He had been just another enemy. Their connection had been just a human response to suffering. And in that ordinary compassion lay the extraordinary power to heal worlds.